Welcome. This is the post-secondary transition conversation. We focus on the ins and outs and everything in between of the transition process for families of students with disabilities. I'm one of the hosts. My name is Meghan Smallwood, and I am a public school transition coordinator. As always, I have a co-host.
My name is Patrick Cadigan. I am also a public school transition coordinator.
And today we are here to have a conversation with a wonderful parent who just went through the transition process. And I know her story, and she shared her story with my team not too long ago. And I'm very grateful that she's here to share with us. And her name is Jane Plapinger. So welcome, Jane.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So I guess the best way is just to start off to share a little bit about you and your son. Do you mind telling us about him?
Sure. David, my son, is on the autism spectrum. He's very social. He's usually in a very happy mood and brings smiles to the faces of people who he interacts with. He enjoys listening to music, participating in structured activities with peers, visiting with and having phone and video calls with family members, and going to Ocean City and riding on our outboard motorboat. He also has really enjoyed work-based experiences that he had both in school and during school in the community. So he went to a public school in our community until he was toward the end of 7th grade. And due to behavioral challenges and lack of engagement in his learning, he went from our homeschool into a non-public. And then, sadly, after 2 years, he kind of behaved his way out of our home. We had a lot of behavioral challenges, and home ceased to be a safe place. And he went into a non-public residential school in the state.
Can I ask, what age was that then?
Just shy of his 17th birthday.
And then, Jane, if you don't mind, when you talk about behavioral challenges, what behavioral challenges were you experiencing?
He had 2 behavioral triggers. We went through a behavioral treatment program at Kennedy Krieger to analyze his behavior and identify his triggers. The behaviors included verbal and physical aggression. At school, he had behaviors, but they were manageable. In school, the non-publics had really deep behavioral supports that helped him. His triggers at home were my attention. He wanted my attention and could not tolerate not having my attention. He couldn't tolerate 2 minutes of not having my attention. So home life became really challenging because you have to do things like make dinner and answer the phone and all kinds of things. And then also losing a desired object like tablet. Looked like a lot of kids' tablet time is over. So yeah, it wasn't safe for us anymore at home.
I know that has to be a hard decision to make. And I know I've worked with a lot of families who struggle with it. But I think you brought up a good point. Home wasn't safe anymore. And that's really crucial for not just, your son, but the rest of the family.
Yeah, it was heartbreaking to take him out of his home. We took our son out of an orphanage when he was a child. So it was very hard to take him out of the home. However, the good news is that the school he went to, the residential school, was a wonderful, wonderful place for him. And it gave him the environment he needed. It gave him the attention he needed. And we put our family back together after that and had 4.5 years of weekly visits that were wonderful. And his behavior, he just really turned the corner with his behavior.
As someone who has not met your son, but has also worked with students with autism. You mentioned that your son is verbal. When you say verbal, how verbal is he? Conversational verbal? Like, what does that look like?
He has a lot of words. He doesn't have a whole lot of conversation. So he could tell you what he wants for dinner. He will talk in a sentence more on a concrete level, but it's hard for him to formulate new sentences. He does a fair amount of repetition and scripting, like a lot of individuals with autism. So when he's upset, he tended to use his body and not his words. Now he'll say, I'm feeling agitated. And I'll say, what do you need to do? And he'll say, use my words. Take 3 deep breaths like Henry taught me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he has these strategies
Mm-hmm.
that he's learned. So his communication is kind of somewhere in the middle there. He's very verbal and is limited in what he can communicate.
So then it sounds like the quality of time together after that transition to residential was much better for everybody.
It's been wonderful. I mean, literally our family came back together after several years of living on the defense, and just living in this hyper-vigilant situation due to the fact that his triggers were impossible to avoid.
So then I know from experience with you that was a big piece when you were preparing for transition, the residential piece. So I guess what age did you really start thinking about that post-secondary transition for him then?
Well, I started worrying about it years ago.
That's a good way to put it. When did you start worrying?
Really, as soon as he went into residential, because that is such a huge component of the residential piece. It's a separate track. But I only started to think about it concretely in terms of educating myself and about the transition process and preparing myself, researching agencies about 2 years before he was going to transition.
And when you say that you were researching, how did you go about your research? Did you use the internet? Did you talk to friends? Like, how did you do it?
I went to transition fairs. Actually, I started going to transition fairs when he was like 14. And I needed to hear a lot of those presentations over and over again. One suggestion I have for parents is to start early, because it's not just, is this a good program or place or agency for my child? There's all those other pieces like the SSI and the ID and the estate planning, and if your child needs guardianship, and there's just a million pieces to it. And I had to hear those pieces a few times to understand it. And that is separate from all the work of transitioning from school to adult services.
Yeah, so those transition fairs are definitely important. I know that you came on a lot of tours too. And were there any other parents that you were able to connect with, whether it was at his school or through social media?
Yeah, so transition fairs was just one thing I did. Another thing I did before I even started connecting with other parents, although I did do that, was I went through a training that Parents Place of Maryland provides. That's funded by the Maryland State Department of Education. It's called Guiding the Journey. And that really helped me. It was a 4-session Saturday program that had me develop a vision statement for David, and it also familiarized me with the Charting the Life course planning framework. And Charting the Life course has these it's an approach to person-centered planning that has these different worksheets. And we had homework and had to fill out some of the worksheets, and I hated doing it. I have to admit, I really did not enjoy it. But once I had done it, what I realized is it was forcing me to think in a very specific way about the different dimensions of David's life and what they needed to look like. So that when I started to visit agencies, which is another thing I did, I already knew what I was looking for because those worksheets forced me to articulate not just my vision for David's life, but what that would look like, what kind of supports he would need, what kinds of things he enjoyed, what kinds of things he didn't enjoy, what kind of technology he would need, and so many other things. So by the time I started visiting agencies, I had a picture in my head of what I was looking for, and I had written out questions that would enable me to get at or try to get at the information that I needed from a given agency to make a decision whether to put them in, yes, I'm interested pile, I'm not sure pile, or no way. Is this going to be a good fit for my son pile?
As we have talked with others as well about this process, how did you differentiate that? Like, what helped you to understand that, okay, this agency might work better for me versus this other agency where, I'm not really getting a good feeling about them? Was there a tried and true method that you would use?
One thing that was very helpful when possible was to visit the agency. And I was doing it at the tail end of COVID. So that was very challenging because a lot of agencies were not doing in-person tours. And I did a few virtual tours. I think you organized a few, Meghan, and you really can't tell a lot from a virtual tour. I wanted to meet the people. I wanted to look at the facility, little things like, is there a separate bathroom for the clients and the staff? And what does that bathroom look like? If there is a separate, is it clean? And there's just so many things you pick up when you walk into a place. I also learned that sometimes people would describe the kind of program I was looking for or characteristics of the kind of program I was looking for. And then I would talk to a knowledgeable person, whether it was another parent or some other knowledgeable person, like the transition coordinator at my son's school. And I would learn things about that agency that were different than what I had been told. So, and I think that what I was discovering was that agencies are changing. There's a lot of change going on in the DD field, and many agencies understand now that DDA is really pushing them to provide services that are community-based and very individualized and person-centered, where people have more agency or control over what they do and have more input and their preferences are respected. And those are things, of course, I was looking for. Yet many agencies are on that path and they're very well intentioned and they know the language, they know how to talk about it. But when I talk to like a parent whose adult child was getting services from that agency, I would discover that a lot of those good intentions were not yet operational. So that it became really important, to your point, Patrick, not to just visit an agency, but to talk to people who were familiar on the receiving end with the agency services. Because again, with all good intention, agencies would sometimes make it sound like they were further along in being community-based or being person-centered or being employment first than they actually were able to deliver on.
That's a great point, because I know going on those tours, it's kind of like a sales pitch. They want to sell you the program, and I know parents will ask the questions that are important to them, and a lot of times they'll hear, oh yeah, that's something we could do. That's something we could do. We could talk about that. But then they move further along because I keep them in their yes pile. And then when they actually get to, the specific meeting to discuss services, they're told, oh no, we can't do that. So you're right. I think connecting with parents who already are at that program with their young adults is very helpful to hear what's actually happening. And I know you had your vision set when you went on the program tours, and employment was part of that vision for him. I was telling parents after I heard you, share your journey to our team about making a vision, making sure you have a vision, because when you go in and they're giving you the sales pitch, I feel like a lot of times they're looking for your sales pitch too. And because they'll say, tell me about your child. And you have 30 seconds to tell them something, and they're already kind of forming an opinion, unfortunately. And I know a lot of times parents don't really know what they should say, but I think having that vision in mind of what you see for your child really would help to kind of frame the conversation a bit better, whether it's employment, whether it's just community exploration, whether it's, volunteering, just to get an idea and put it out there.
Yeah. And it was interesting because I was also warned by my son's school's transition coordinator about the other side of that person-centered planning and acknowledging, honoring preferences of individuals. And that is that some agencies have a very rigid definition of giving choices. And if everybody's going somewhere, say volunteering, and my son's asked, do you want to go? And he says, no, he's never done it before. He's not sure what it is. So he just says, no. They'll say, no problem. You can stay back.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas my child needs guided choices. He needs an agency that would say, hey, we're all going volunteering today, because he will have a chance to be exposed to that activity. And then after he's had a chance to try it, they will, one, observe and see if he likes it. And two, they'll ask him afterwards, do you want to do this again? So I was paying attention to that as well. So there's these continuums around certain characteristics of agencies that could be either too much of something or, too little. Another thing that I did that was really helpful is I had a life planning meeting that I convened with all the key people in my son's life. That helped gather information that fed what I had already put down on paper when I was going through the Parents Place of Maryland training. So I had a fuller idea. His school staff were wonderful. They sent videotaped interviews in response to questions I had sent them. And his CCS, his coordinator of community services, showed up, and she was furiously taking notes for his person-centered plan. And family members were there, and they not only got to contribute because they saw a whole different side of my son. They saw what he looks like in the community, but they also learned all about his adult life and how they need to think about it, because I'm not going to be around forever. And that's one of things that a lot of parents are hit with during the transition process as well.
When did you have that meeting? Was that the beginning of his exit year or the year before?
I had it at the beginning of his exit year. So it was after I'd gone through the training and was familiar with the templates. And I had somebody facilitate it, which was wonderful because I could really sit and listen and take in what people were saying about my child. And I was so surprised because, they say every parent is an expert on their own child. And it's true, and it's also not true, because I heard things about him that were really helpful. And a lot of it was the strengths. And it's sad to say that often parents are very focused on the deficits, because during all those school years, your child is never catching up. And it's all about the IEP and the supports that your child needs. And unfortunately, it's often very deficit based in terms of how parents experience all of that. And thinking about planning for your child's life, adult life, is anything but deficit based. It's right. Like a total 180. It's, oh my God, I want him to be happy, healthy, and safe. And this is what it's going to look like. And these are the supports that he's going to need. But it's a total flip. And once I made that transition, I stopped feeling so scared, and I still was stressed, but I felt there was a balance of being excited about looking for a life that would include the things he loves to do and the supports that he would need to do those things.
That's, I think, the most important thing. Like, I know it's a scary transition, but I think really looking at the positive, and I know, we talk about what's the good life, what's the meaningful life for them. And I love that thought, and it's let's think of the good things to come. They're graduating, they're going to be moving on and doing what they truly love to do, just like everyone else. That's all of our goals. So I love that. I think that's a great way to look at it. I know it wasn't all easy and positive. I know there was challenges. What would you say was the most challenging milestone for you throughout the whole process?
I think there were two challenges for me. One was figuring out the residential and the meaningful day services and having to pay attention to both of those because they're totally different services, and some agencies only do one of them. Some agencies only do residential, other agencies only do meaningful day services, some agencies do both. I didn't know whether it was better to have one agency to do both, so I should only look at agencies that could, or whether it's better to have two separate agencies. I also was confused because I was advised to look for residential first because my son had to move July 1st, not August 1st, not September 1st, July 1st, so that there was a lot of pressure there. And I was told, well, once you know where he's going to be, then you can look for day services. However, I wanted to make sure he would be in a place where there would be day services, either from that agency or a nearby agency that would meet his needs. So that was hard to pay attention to both of those things. And the other thing that was tough to deal with, and it caused me a lot of uncertainty, was how to deal with his behavioral history, because he was doing so great and he'd been doing so great for 4.5 years. He wasn't even on a behavior plan. He hadn't been on a behavior plan in several years. So I wanted to make sure he ended up in a place that could provide the behavioral supports he needed. And I was so afraid if I didn't focus on the behavioral supports, he might end up degressing after he had been so successful for 4.5 years. On the other hand, I didn't want to exaggerate his behavioral challenges because he wasn't having significant behaviors. And there are agencies that do not want individuals with significant behavioral challenges, and there are agencies that are very eager and happy to serve those individuals. So that was a whole confusing piece. And I had some unhappy moments when I remember reaching out to one agency and all this person wanted to ask me on the phone about was the behavior. She wanted to focus on how bad was it? What was the worst behavior? And never asked me anything else about my child. And I remember talking to the transition coordinator afterwards and saying, that is one agency I don't feel good about. And she said, don't jump to that conclusion. And I was like, what do you mean? Don't jump to that conclusion. And she said, I know this agency. We've placed other individuals there. Once they're there, they take care of them really well. I think they just wanted to make sure they could support him. And so that's how confusing this all was, because that was so off-putting. However, that is an example of how I felt as a parent that I didn't have much control over the process, as much effort as I was putting in. And agencies all had their own approach to asking for information about my child. And some of it was unsettling. Many agencies, when I called them, and I called a lot of agencies because of the residential and how hard that was going to be, a lot of the agencies wouldn't even tell me if they had any housing available, any residential service available, until I submitted all of David's documents, his psychological and his IP. And I felt like I was violating his privacy, sharing all this information with an agency that I didn't even know if I was interested in the agency. But I had to go along with their process, even though their process did not feel good and it didn't make much sense to me. Also felt like, oh my gosh, they're going to spend all this time reading this information about this young man, and his family might not even be interested. And so I was worried about wasting their time. So it was a very, very confusing process. And I also found that many agencies, and I think COVID had something to do with this, since this was the tail end, there were agencies that we had interviews, we submitted all this documentation. I was doing all these follow-up calls, trying to figure out, okay, are they willing to serve him or not? Should they be on the list or off the list? And I wouldn't hear from them. And then it got to be like end of March, and I was told, you need to lock, my CCO said, you need to lock this in because of the residential piece and how it has to happen on time. And so I had to eliminate these agencies that we had put so much effort into. And they had met David, had all this information, but they wouldn't get back to me. And then two of them, after I made a decision, reached out to me and said, hey, we're interested. and it was past the time frame that we could consider them. And actually one of them, and I had made so many calls to this agency because I really liked them, and they just wouldn't call me back. I emailed. And when I went with this other agency and I emailed them a thank you for going with another agency, the email I got back was, oh, we were so looking forward to providing services to your son. But their day program and their residential weren't talking to each other. One of the other things, it was the residential that wasn't getting back to me. The people running the day services were very eager to provide services to him. So that was just another source of confusion.
So obviously we know residential is part of the vision, but in terms of his day, what was the vision for David? Was it employment? Were you looking for him to work?
Yes. Our vision was for him to participate in integrated employment and structured social and recreational activities. We never saw him as working many, many hours a week, but he had a job when he was at school, his last 2 years in the community, supported by a job coach. He was a production worker one with a company, and he loved it. And he worked 4.5 to 5 hours a day and would fall asleep on the way back to school because the effort it took him to pay attention and stay on task for 4.5, 5 hours was enormous. But he loved working. Every weekend I see him, he tells me he misses his coworkers. So we definitely wanted maybe, like 2 afternoons a week or something of employment as part of his life.
So I know he's transitioned and exited from the school system. How has it been going?
It's been going pretty well so far. Fingers crossed, because I thought, so this is another thing that surprised me. I thought once I found the placements and we actually moved him July 1st, I could exhale and it would be like, okay, he's transitioned. Well,
Done.
The trick is I could exhale because he did have a place to live. He had a program to go to every day that I think was a really good fit for him. He seems really happy. He's much closer to family than he was when he was in the residential school, which is wonderful. However, now we're in the next phase of the transition, which is building a new adult life for him. He's in a totally different community. He's living in a house with new housemates. Staff are totally different. He's going to a day program that's community based. And he's learning all of these new places in the community. I'm looking for recreational and social activities for evenings and weekends for him. In the process of transitioning all his medical providers, healthcare providers. It's a lot. And I'm speaking a lot to the residential piece. If he was only going from school to meaningful day services in the same community, a lot of building this new life would not need to happen. Some would, but not.
Yeah. I think still, though, I know a lot of parents kind of wait until, 21 or so, if they can, to start thinking about that healthcare piece and switching over to, more adult physicians because they've kind of, done their time with the pediatrician side. So it does ultimately have to happen, maybe not switching communities, but it is important too.
Yeah, well, we had to switch all healthcare providers because he was living several hours away from his new community. So he's not near any of those providers,
Yeah.
separate from the adult child issue.
So now the big question is his residential the same provider as his day program?
No. And silly me for wondering which was better, getting both of those services from one agency versus two, because it turned out I didn't have any choice in the matter. And that after a while, I realized I just had to find a residential setting that worked for him. And it turned out the residential setting we found was with an agency that did not have meaningful day services in that part of the state. So we had to find a separate agency for the day services. And it's actually worked out really well. As someone said to me way back when I was talking to any parent I could about this parent said, well, one of the advantages of two separate agencies is you have more sets of eyes on your child. And that's always a good thing, especially if it's like my son is risk of not being able to totally protect himself in situations. So knowing there's different sets of eyes on him, and also his life is richer because there's two little villages that are supporting him now instead of one. But interestingly, I also spoke to a parent who said to me, I thought it would be simpler and more streamlined for my son to be getting residential and meaningful day services from the same agency. But the reality is that the residential and the day service, people don't talk to each other. So it's almost as if it is two separate agencies anyway. So, and every agency is different, but it's working out really well for us. We had one of the pieces of advice I would give parents is to be flexible and be willing to problem solve and be willing to be open-minded, because we had to do that. We had everything set up. And I learned that the day program that David was going to, unlike most day programs, does not own vans, does not provide transportation. DDA expects day programs to be responsible for transportation, but they are not required to physically transport people. And when I was talking to the admissions director of the agency whose group home David was going to move into, she whispered to me, don't worry, we will take care of it. The group home staff will take him to his program. Well, then we had the formal meeting to write up the PCP, and the admissions director wasn't there. There was a higher level person from the residential provider. When transportation came up, and I turned to that person and said, I understand your agency will provide transportation. They said, oh, we don't do that. That's the day program's responsibility. So I was worried that the day program was going to fall apart. That placement was going to fall apart because David's not able to independently manage public transportation. However, we problem solved about it, and he's going by Metro Access, door to door by himself. He got a phone as a graduation present. We put a tracking thing on it. Calls me way too many times a day, although it went down from the first day. It was about 40 times, and now we're down to less than 5 a day. But he is getting himself to his program from his group home and back every day through Metro Access on his own. And I really wasn't open to that. And I had to. I had to open my mind to it and just manage my anxiety and say, give him a chance to make this work. Give him a chance to be okay riding in a car by himself with just the driver.
I love that. I love that story. And I love that you stepped out of your comfort zone and gave it a chance, because I know it's scary, but he did it.
Yeah.
That came up in one of the recent discussions that we had, where the person that we were talking with had said sometimes parents have to go, outside of their comfort zone, which can be really, really challenging. So yeah, it comes up quite a bit.
And it's not, and nothing is perfect. And I've adopted the philosophy, things just need to be good enough. They don't need to be perfect. 2 weeks ago, it took him 2 hours to get to his day program. Instead of a half an hour, he was in the car for 2 hours. So he survived it. He missed some of his day program. He probably learned something, which is that sometimes things go wrong. And that's kind of a good lesson for all of us to be reminded of once in a while.
Gonna say, I can think of some commutes where I got stuck in traffic for over an hour or so, and it wasn't a perfect day, but got through it, and the next day was better. So that is a life lesson for sure.
The other thing that we were flexible about is how we thought about housemates for David. As a parent, you get this vision and you want things to be ideal. And agencies will talk about how when they create a new home, they will match people. So they create a house of peers where people might have similar interests or whatever. That was not going to happen for David. Agencies opening new homes happens at a timeline that was much more unpredictable than we could handle, given our July 1 drop dead, date. We found a home where there just happened to be a vacancy. The question was, would this be a good environment for him? The 3 gentlemen already living in this home are very different than David. They need much more intensive supports than he does. They are not verbal, and David is very social and so on. So that was another kind of moment where we were like, oh, this might not be at all good, because we were very focused on this idealized vision of him being part of a house that got put together, taking into account who he is and who would be good housemates for him. And then we thought about it and we said, well, at his residential school, most of his housemates have been nonverbal and not very social either. And I don't mean just nonverbal. I mean, not interested in communicating. I don't mean that in a negative way, kind of to themselves very much. And he's very much out there. However, we then realized that the people he likes to interact with are adults, and it's the staff. And those are the most important people in his life. And because his 3 housemates need very intensive support, there's always 3 staff in this home. And when they met him and we went on a visit there, they were totally charmed by him because he would bring some noise into the house, a different vibe than the others. And he has the opportunity to help out the others and do things for them that they can't do for themselves. Like I was told, he takes the hand of one of them, leads him to the dinner table. So that was just another moment where we really had to reevaluate what was in our mind about what he could handle, what would be good for him. It was kind of like the transportation issue. It was one of these things where we really changed our thinking about it. And it's worked out great. And speaking about staff, in response to your earlier question, Patrick, trying to assess the quality of staffing at an agency was one of my main areas of focus when I was checking out a provider. It was really hard to do.
Yeah, I'll bet.
Everybody is different, but my son's happiness is directly proportional to the quality of the staff because he's social and he craves engagement. He wants to talk to people. He wants attention from people. He wants to joke around with people. He wants to help. And we had 4.5 years of mixed experiences at their group home that David lived in when he was in the residential school. We had some staff who were wonderful with him and engaged with him, and then we had others who didn't. We saw the impact that it had on his life.
That's something that's come up before. As someone, for myself, Meghan has been in this transition environment for such a long time. So I always kind of throw out that I am the surrogate in the experience. In the conversations that we've had, both in person and online, a lot of times it's always been interesting to me where one family's experience with an agency can be vastly different than another family's experience with the same agency. And this whole process is so individualized that it really just depends on the experience. So as someone coming on the outside and trying to communicate to those people on the inside, I have had more than several times to say, okay, if this is something that you're hearing from someone else, just keep in mind that it might be a different experience for you personally based on your needs and the things that you've experienced. So
you make a really good point. When I talk to other families who were ahead of me and already had their kids in a residential setting, I would learn as much as possible about their child because of exactly what you're saying. This one mom, she described a provider, and she told me things that were going on in her son's house. And I said to myself, oh my God, I would not want my child there. And it was working for her. It was great that it worked for her. So even when you talk to other families, you have to filter it through whatever you know about that parent and whatever you know about their child. And then people in the same agency have different experiences based on which staff is working with the child. For residential, I think it's really important to meet the supervisor of the group home, if at all possible, because that person will be very important. And one of the challenges in visiting agencies and meeting with them is sometimes you could meet those important people, and sometimes you are just dealing with an admissions. And they're kind of, part of their job is marketing.
Yeah.
So you don't get the information you need about who's going to be ultimately responsible for your child. When we visited the group home that David ended up moving into, not only was the supervisor there, but a bunch of the staff were there. And I just watched them interact with him. I just stood back and I watched. It told me so much about what they were like. And to my happiness, they were laughing with him, and the women in the house who happened to be the staff who do the cooking, one of them said to David, tell me, what do you like to eat? And I had such a good feeling about the place. And I was so happy that I got to see the staff who would be working with him. But you can't always do that. I would ask questions about staff. And I have to say, agencies were really forthright when I asked them about staff turnover. I was so surprised and impressed that when I would ask very specific questions, like, what is your staff turnover rate? What is your staff vacancy rate? I would get honest answers. And there were agencies who said, we're in a staffing crisis. And I was like, thank you. Thank you for sharing that with me. That told me that agency was probably not able to be as particular in who they were hiring. Maybe it was another agency that wasn't having so much difficulty in hiring people.
And I also feel like when they say that, it's almost code for, well, we're not quite sure what will be, who will be accepting come the next year. But at least they're, like you said, upfront about it rather than, oh, yeah, no problem. We'll take care of this. Because, I know it'd be much easier to know the truth. And I know I have a parent who just went through this. Like, she wanted an answer from an agency so she could either move forward with the PCP or cross them off the list. She doesn't want to waste the time of anybody. especially when, the clock is ticking and July 1st is right around the corner. So that's definitely very important. But I also want to see, is there anything else you wish that you knew sooner within the transition process to better prepare for his exit?
I wish I had been told how idiosyncratic all the different admission processes are at the different agencies. I was prepared for the confusion of one agency not wanting to talk to me until they had all this documentation. Another, the first step was to have an interview. It would have just helped if I had been told that's what the landscape is. Because I was so bewildered how different every agency was and how disinterested a lot of agencies seemed when I tried to reach out to them, that I would have been less stressed if someone had said to me, this is the territory, this is the landscape, this is what it's going to look like. Don't be discouraged. Just reach out, get whatever information you can. So that was one thing. Another is how long the process took. Some of the transition documents that I've seen, they have a time frame for that last year that isn't accurate in my experience. And again, I have the residential experience, which I know is a lot more complicated. But for families who are looking for residential, they can't wait until October or November if they want choice, if they want to research and really look for a good fit for their child. That's just my experience. It doesn't happen that quickly.
So I think theme is starting sooner than later, which I know
Yeah.
you said you began, thinking about it so much earlier than, it even was, and getting that information and collecting it and hearing it numerous times over and over. I think that's just so important. And I know that's something that we try to remind parents continuously about.
I got anything that I could do on my own out of the way early on, like the SSI application and the MBA and all of those things, so that I could just focus on researching agencies and reaching out to them the last 2 years. Well, I have to say, some agencies didn't want to talk to me initially because it was 2 years earlier. I was encouraged to keep on, however, because I needed to get to know the agencies, and others were very willing to talk to me early on.
Yeah, again, it's very dependent on the agency, and I think that's also very telling too. Some are just like, come on in, we're happy to take you, and others are like, nope, you have to wait. So, yeah, it's interesting to see the difference.
The other thing that I thought was strange was that at the transition fairs where agencies would have a table, they were very encouraging and welcoming. But then when I would reach out to explore whether they'd be a good fit, they were overwhelmed, overloaded, and wouldn't get back to me. That was another disconnect.
Yeah, and I know a lot of parents will say to me, well, I've already left an email or a phone call and, I haven't heard anything. I said, this is the time to nag. This is the time to advocate. This is the time to make sure that your name, of course, very nicely is pulled to the front for good, so they remember you. Because if you just sit around and wait, you're just going to be waiting, unfortunately. So you need to, whether it's the agency, whether it's the coordinator, you need to be the one staying on top of it and making sure things are progressing.
Well, and in that regard, one of the big takeaways for me from this conversation, and one of the things that I appreciate, is hearing the information over and over and over again. That is definitely a plus. But I am also going to say that would be a good place to stop the conversation, because there is a lot to absorb here and my brain hurts.
We really appreciate you sharing your story and all the information you've gathered. And
I appreciate the opportunity to share, because I was helped so much by parents who shared with me, and I welcome the opportunity to pay it forward.
Our discussions are everywhere: Apple, Spotify, YouTube Music, and others. So hit that follow button and you won't miss out. Please help us spread the word about our discussions by leaving us a review. Links to the information from our conversations are always in our show notes. Surf to our sister website, www.postsecondary-transition.com, full of information and links to more resources. Our YouTube channel contains curated videos that revolve around transition, including playlists for guardianship, alternatives to guardianship, ABLE accounts, and more to come. Thanks so much for your time spent with us, and we look forward to talking again soon.